Yan, andyan na kayo. Kayo talaga, hindi kayo pinansin. Sabi ko lang mag-meta tayo about Tatay Digong at saka sa PDP-LABAN. Tapos kay Junior, ay wala talaga, hindi kayo pumansin ako. Hindi lang nag-react. Nung mag-post ako about yung Pasig is Pink. Pre-announcement pa lang, nako po, ilang libo ng reaction kayo talaga. Bias talaga kayo. Yan, pag-usapan natin. Pa-relevance move ang iba dyan, di ba? Mukhang relevant pa daw sila, di ba? Yung isang faction ng isang ruling party na hindi natin alam kung they exist in the full sense of the word anymore or kung relevant pa sila in any sense of the word anymore ay nag-endorse kay surprise, surprise, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Bongbong Marcos, BBM. Why am I not surprised? No. Of course, alam natin over the past few weeks, medyo nagpaparamdam yung mga ibang miyembro ng quote-unquote ruling party. Of course, kasama dyan si Evardone, among others na sa tingin nila, President Duterte actually secretly or not so subtly actually prefers actually Vice President Leni Robredo than the current front runner, no. And then there were indications that who knows that siguro before President Duterte comes in and endorses Leni Robredo in some way, siguro there'll be layers of pre-endorsement at kasama dyan yung potentially one from at least a QZ faction of PDP-LABAN. If not, from also the other faction, the of course, alam na natin sino yan, Pimentel faction with Pacquiao faction, but that would be weird because Pacquiao is also running for the presidency. So, yun ang medyo speculation ng ibang quarters dyan, but mukhang the QZ faction went for what you could call reversion to the mean, what was expected of them. If they back someone like President Duterte, why not back the son of a former dictator, right? At of course, napaka-strong yung reaction ni Coco Pimentel, of course, the son of the late anti-martial law hero Nene Pimentel. Ayon kay Senator Coco Pimentel, sabi niya, they don't even acknowledge that PDP-LABAN was established to oppose the Marcos dictatorship. So ayon sa kanya, with this latest action from Secretary QZ and his cohorts, they have manifested that they are total strangers to PDP-LABAN. They don't even acknowledge that PDP-LABAN was established to oppose the Marcos dictatorship. Time for COMELEC to dismiss the petition of these usurpers. In Germany, for example, pakinggan nyo na, ito yung sinabi. In Germany, for example, a political party formed to oppose Adolf Hitler will definitely not support an Adolf Hitler Jr. Right? Yun ang sinabi nila eh. Logic lang yan. Consistent with the PDP-LABAN history, struggle, deaths, and party constitution. So ito yung galing dun sa kabilang faction na hindi sang-ayon dun sa QZ faction na nag-endorse sa Ferdinand Marcos Jr. So ayon sa kanya, ayon dun sa opposing faction, a political party formed to oppose Adolf Hitler will definitely not support an Adolf Hitler Jr. But let's not forget, both factions supported President Rodrigo Duterte. And let's be serious about this under President Duterte. By some counts, if you look at it on an annual basis, the reports of extrajudicial killings are actually far worse than even what happened during some of the years of the Marcos dictatorship. So, let's put things into perspective. If you want to claim the moral high ground against Marcos Jr., then let's talk about your record of support for the current president who's not necessarily your quintessential liberal Democrat. So, yon. Pero ang tanong naman dito is, may relevance ba? May saysay ba? What is going on here? What is going on here? Ano bang gusto nilang mangyari? Are they expecting to get potentially some leverage, some room for maneuver kung manalo yung current frontrunner? Base sa surveys, of course, ano ba talagang gusto natin mangyari dito? Or ito ba talagang ang kanilang opinion? Respect my opinion. Baka yun ang sasabihin nila, respect our opinion. Baka yan ang magiging line nila. So yon, so ewan ko, I'm not sure if this will help Bongbong Marcos, will this be irrelevant or whatever. But I think one implication is that those who were considering the possibility that Lenny could be endorsed by Duterte in some capacity, ngayon that's been thrown a little bit into doubt. Not that it was really a serious prospect, but President Duterte is President Duterte. No, I mean, this guy has been doing all sorts of things out of the blue from, bolt from the blue, all sorts of blue, At nag-speech si Pangulong Duterte kahapon, kagabi, diba? Pansinin nyo naman. Nung medyo 2-3 a.m., syempre nag-exercise tayo sa gabi para we keep our figure kasi mahirap na pag medyo you don't keep figure, hindi mo na masuot yung mga damit mo na pinaghirapan mo, diba? Yung mga So, eto medyo 2-3 a.m., medyo okay, ligo-ligo, fresh, ganon. Tapos pagtingin, may speech si Tatay Digong. At ang sabi ni Tatay Digong ay talaga may analysis. Meron din si Meta, si Tatay Digong. Sa latest na nangyari sa of course, sa Europa, expert kasi si Tatay sa geopolitics. Of course, Tatay is the art of war, Sanju, diba? Di natin maintindihan, masyadong malalim, hindi rin naintindihan ng ibang bansa, kaya wala rin sa isa, diba? Sabi niya, once Putin resorts to nuclear weapons, as if naman, diba? I mean, of course, anything can happen, but still, I mean, may nukes din yung kabila, may nuclear bomb din ang France, ang Britain, ang US, hello, diba? At wala naman nuclear weapons ang Ukraine, no? They gave it up. They used to be, I think, the third largest. They had the third largest deposits or repository of nuclear weapons. They gave it up, which was a big mistake. Probably they should have just kept it. But sabi niya, kung mangyari yon, kung Putin escalates, then China will invade. Tapos parang medyo vague, hindi niya matapos na mabuti yung sent na hindi. Basta parang point niya, pag pag mag-gun girl yung isa doon sa kabila, mag-gun boy yung isa dito sa kabila. As if naman, ito na naman si Tata, yung mga geopolitical niya. Bakit ganon? Bakit ganon ang ating Anyway, malapit na magkaroon ng bagong presidente. So sana naman, may SMNI debate pa kayo may grand finale. May mga ganun may mga rounds At mukhang puro nag-back out yung iba kasi alam na this, di ba? Alam na this. At mukhang yung ating former professor na medyo baka naman, mag-shine na naman si Madam, mag-thesis questions na naman siya sa mga estudyante niya sa podium. And then pagdating kay BBM, I'll send you the paper. Yes, ma'am, pasend yung paper sa akin. Mag-chummy-chums na naman sila. Ito na naman tayo. Tatay, bakit ganun yung mga analysis mo? Konting naman dyan. Alam mo, nakakaya yan para, yung mga China mismo, nagkakamot sila. Hindi naman kami ganun yan. Sugod-sugod lang na ganun. Hello. Napaka-calculating ang China, napaka-calibrated. Matalino yung mga yon. For all criticisms I have against, not the Chinese people, I'm talking about the regime in Zhongnanhai, makakalculated yung mga taong yan. Yes, they make mistakes here and there. I mean, it's a given, they're superpower. But hindi naman sila yung mga bara-bara mag-isip. Ito talaga tong mga to. And can someone brief Tatay Digong? Actually, Russia and China have big problems dun sa borders nila. For now, walang choice ang Russia. They have to concentrate. They're relatively limited, shrinking population pa nga. Yung military resources nila sa Western Front. Pero yung Siberian border nila with China, naku po. Delikadong Russia dyan. Dami mga Chinese na businessman pumapasok dyan. Nag-aasawa ng mga Russian dyan sa Siberian region. Naku po. Delikadong Russia down the road with China. At yung China, isang superpower, economic superpower. Kailangan niya yung mga resources dyan. Oil, gas, timber, minerals, all of those things. So, kung ikaw ay Russia, magdala-dalawang isip ka kasi mamaya talagang madali ka dyan sa Far East. So, yon. But anyway, does Tatay know these things? Wag na natin Doon na kayo sa vloggers, yung mga expert na daw na zero yung kanilang relevant publication hanggang ano lang sila, mga post lang sa ano. Ay nako, ito. Okay. Now let's go to serious. Let's go serious, okay. So let me discuss yung column ko today on Philippine Daily Inquirer. Oh, wag kayong magalit wag kayong magalit. Ang title po, Marcos Jr. Presidency, 3 Scenarios. Oh, ayan, magagalit na kayo. Ay, hindi pa tapos, wala akong sinabi na tapos ng laban. I'm just saying, wag kayong mag-alala. There will be also an analysis of what could the next presidency look like if, let's say, another top contender wins, namely Leni Robredo, for instance. Oh, so wait lang kayo, wag kayo humusga sa akin kaagad, ha. But I think it's time to look at really scenarios para hindi naman tayo vague lang yung idea. Like for instance, so yung mga ayaw kay Marcos, what are you trying to prevent? Are you trying to prevent another Marcosian 20th century dictatorship? Because I don't think that's gonna happen, right? But does that mean that chill lang, relax na, wag kayo mag-alala? Not necessarily. That is why meron tayong column, meron tayong analysis at prognosis. At tinitingnan po natin dito is 3 possible scenarios if the surveys are correctly projecting the winner and the current trend lines hold. So yun Marcos Jr. presidency, 3 possible scenarios. So no, I would even say possible Marcos Jr. presidency, 3 possible scenarios. No. So dito ba lang na-clarify ko. Let me first be absolutely clear. Nothing is final until it's finalized. Rarely is anything predetermined in the realm of men and women who are extremely susceptible to wild swings in opinion. Not onion, opinion. And human agency often trumps social engineering. Ay, daming English. Ayan na naman, sasabihin naman ng mga nosebleed, English. Alam mo naman tayo. O, kahit nga, Ilocano tayo. O, mandamdama. O, sige, bababa tayo dito Basahin nga sa Philippine Daily Inquirer. Ako makapal ang mukha ako. So I roll the ball. Okay, ano ba talagang concern natin dito? No? So, ito let me be very clear. 700 words lang meron ako dito. So, very limited. At sabi ko to understand what could happen next, do not look at Ferdinand Marcos Sr., who was a dictator during the Cold War and 20th century. Mas helpful kung titignan natin someone very familiar too. Not a Filipino, but the modern Tsar of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Because Vladimir Putin, although he will be judged for his unprovoked and disastrous invasion of Ukraine at porang bugbog sila doon sa kanilang invasion, actually, the other thing he should be known for, and he's actually known for by a lot of Russia watchers, is that he oversaw the construction of 21st century authoritarianism, which has influenced leaders from Hungary, Orban, Turkey, Erdogan, even Trump, you could say in the US, although Trump tried, didn't work out. America is a country with some sort of rule of law at least. And the Philippines. Sabi nga ni Tatay Digong, di ba? Putin is his favorite hero. So, mahalaga na pag-usapan yung influensya ni Putin sa construction of 21st century style authoritarianism na napakaiba dun sa mga old style dictatorship. Dahil po, yung old style dictatorship, alam natin yung ang drill dyan. You create a false flag operation, yung mga, Plaza Miranda, yung mga Reichstag files. And then, may emergency, yung mga komunista, atake na, magkudeta tayo. Ayan. So, self-coup, declare martial law, new constitution, alam na natin this. We know the rest of history, except kung puro ka lang TikTok, siguro hindi mo alam masyadong history. Joke lang. Magbasa naman kayo. So, we know the drill of the 20th century dictatorship, but Putin did it differently. Suabe, diba? Ex-KGB, so he knows what he's doing. One of the ways that he went after the opposition and independent elements in the country, guess anong ginawa niya? 20 years ago, he used tax evasion cases. He used all sorts of administrative, legal cases against independent media, etc. And he got rid of them. One by one, yan ang ginawa niya. No? Now, in fairness, Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore was doing something similar, although he was using libel, wala pang cyber, per libel cases, for instance, against his opponents. So, yan ang tinatawag na soft authoritarianism or soft dictatorship, depending on how you do it. But Putin really invented a kind of a cool version of that. Now, Farid Zakaria, a very influential CNN journalist, makikita niyo yung interview namin, for instance, about Trump, Duterte, etc., about him the other year. Farid Zakaria called this illiberal democracy. So democracy only in a sense na meron elections. May election sa Russia, nanalo si Putin. At sa pagkaalam ko, ayan, hindi siya dumadalo dun sa mga debate. So ang ginagawa ni Putin, yung mga iba dyan, mag-debate kayo dyan, tas manood lang sila, popcorn, gano'n. Pero alam natin sino mananalo. Ang usapan dito is ano yung mga tira-tira na pwede ibigay dun sa mga ibang kandidato na medyo nag-effort na tumakbo, di ba? And then you have few really brave opposition people like Alexei Navalny who really tried to challenge, of course, but under impossible conditions. So there's democracy only in the sense that may frequent elections, but alam natin who's gonna win and alam natin who's gonna lose, and the question is only margins, no? And the other thing, of course, is the populist strongman appeal of Vladimir Putin. He kind of gives this cool image. I'm a strong leader. I'm democratically elected. And try to portray all his opponents and rivals, etc., as mga tuta of the West, as extension of Western imperialism, etc. And this has worked very well in Russia for quite a long time, until, of course, more recently na medyo sumusobra na kasi medyo Marcos senior level na, 21 years na si Putin yata, almost 22 years na siya in power. That does things to you, no? Now, this is relevant because if you look at it, a lot of modern authoritarian systems, they don't do the old dictatorship, shut down all media, pakulong lahat ng rivals kaagad, executions, right, purge and all. Hindi na uso yan. That's not how they do it. They do it more subtle, more step-by-step, more calibrated, and then there's a veneer of legality, libel issues, tax evasion issues, etc., etc. So they can use all of those kind of issues, no? So for me, if you're worried about authoritarianism, this is the kind of authoritarianism you have to think about. Not necessarily the 20th century style dictatorship. So right off the bat, let me say this. If Marcos Jr. becomes the next president, it's not going to be another martial law, and I love that. It's very, very unlikely. Very, very unlikely. Of course, anything can happen, like super black swan. But we're talking about gray swans here. We're talking about probabilistic wild situations, not out of this world situations, right? Not completely black swans, but gray swans. Now, I discussed three possible scenarios based on three different variables. No? Unang-una, mahalaga po yung margin of victory. And this also flies for anyone. No? If not Marcos, even for Lenny. Mahalaga po yung margin of victory. Because yung margin of victory ascertains a certain degree of legitimacy, and more importantly, gives you a certain degree of personal destiny and sense of self-assuredness. No? Mahalaga yan. So if Bongbong wins the same way that it was close in 2016 that he lost, no, then it could have the kind of moderating effect that it had on Lenny, for instance. I mean, let's be honest. I think Lenny would have been twice more fiery if her victory over Marcos was not so raised or thin. She won. She's duly elected Vice President of the Republic. It has been confirmed multiple times by the Supreme Court. Ilan pa bang talong kailangan ng kabila? But, you know, when the margins are so thin, it does something to your self-confidence, your sense of destiny, and your legitimacy, and therefore your political capital. Mahalaga yung margin. Pangalawa, factional politics and personalistic jostling within the ruling regime. Katulad ng sinabi ko, if Bongbong Marcos becomes the next president, he'll owe a lot of that to Sara Duterte and the Sara All effect in Mindanao. Because Bongbong Marcos was 13, 14, 15% before Sara dropped out. Once Sara dropped out, he picked up the 25, 30%. Put it together, we're already talking about 40, 50%. With some bandwagoning here and there, you can even go to 60, 70%, right? So Sara All effect was very, very significant in allowing Marcos to be the dominant candidate that he is supposed to be based on the surveys. No. And yung so yung mangyayaring internal negotiations, internal jostling, internal compromises or tensions and all sa pagitan nila Sara, mga Arroyo, Romualdez, Marcos, all of that will be very important. So it could become, I'll discuss it, a consociational leadership. But the third important factor is, ano naman ang ambag ng mga international powers and partners? Katulad ng Amerika, wala pa nga silang ambassador dito. Kamusta naman kayo dyan? Beijing, meron silang bagong ambassador. I'm not sure he's doing as well yet as the former Chinese ambassador, Zhang, I think. But let's see. But also Brussels, the European Union, the British, the Japanese, the Australians, and even the Russians could have some sort of influence about how our next president will behave and will handle his power and presidency. So these three factors are important. Accordingly, I came up with three scenarios. Again, this is very preliminary analysis at ayoko i-overdo yan because hindi pa tapos yung laban, marami pang pwede mangyari. So I don't want to be accused of, ito na, you're preempting the result. But I think it's okay to do some sort of scenario building because this is just the rigor, right? This is de rigor. Even you talking about the political analysis. Okay, let's go back here. Three scenarios. So the first scenario is what very few people are expecting. But this is the scenario whereby Marcos goes maximalist, right? Not Marcos Sr., but probably closer to what Putin was 10, 20 years ago, right? In this scenario, he transmogrifies into a much more assertive and ambitious political figure, quite different from the laid-back avuncular image that he has today. Let's not forget, yung huling picture ni Senator Bongbong Marcos before they left they left Malacanang, diba? Naka-military fatigue siya, right? And he has some, I think, special forces or army training. And we know he was a relative hardliner towards the end, the twilight days of the Marcos dictatorship. So there is that side to him, which of course no one talks about or people have forgotten, but I won't underestimate Senator Marcos. I think he has a feisty and strong side that has allowed him to be cool and all of that throughout the years, calm and collected. But once you win with big margins, 67, 80%, that does things to you. Now, to give a kind of a other example, I mean, Putin. One reason Putin was put into power, according to Masha Gessen, in the late 1990s was they thought madali siya manipulate and all of that, not knowing deep inside he actually has his own ambition and he was very self-certain and had a clear vision for Russia. So never underestimate people who seem laid back and avuncular or passive, because once they're really in a position of power, they could show a different side to us. Now, if you're a supporter, you would like that. If you're not a supporter, then you will have concerns about that. So I call that the maximalist scenario. Now, the second scenario is, you can call it the consociational/cartel scenario. This is a situation whereby the margin is not as big. Let's say Marcos wins 40%, 45%. Other candidates come to 25, 30%. And then Sara does very well. Let's say she wins 60, 70%, big win as vice presidency. So Sara comes in as a very, very confident vice president, feeling she played a very important role sa prospective victory ni Marcos. Ayan, nag-tune out na yung iba dyan, ha. Hey, we're doing scenario building. Let's do proper analysis. Kasi ayoko yung vague masyado. Like you say, what are you scared of? And then people give you an idea of the past when the future could be quite different. Now, in this scenario, in this consociational/cartel scenario, it will be a more predictable, gradualist, consensus-based approach. No, kung saan Marcos has to work things through, consult with other factions, etc., before they come up with key decisions. But the final scenario is what you can call the minimalist scenario. This is a scenario whereby the margin of victory is very, very narrow, very, very narrow. Let's say Leni picks up, she brings it to 30, 35%. Bongbong comes down to around 35, 40%. Then, of course, that means Isko had to pick up, so Isko comes to 25, 30%. So quite a close fight. And in this scenario, you also have a very strong, cohesive opposition. So even if the opposition may have lost quite narrowly or not with decisive margin on the part of frontrunner, they have a strong movement. They have an inspiring leadership. They are cohesive. They're essentially everything that opposition was not in 2016 when President Duterte won. In this scenario, I think Bongbong Marcos will be much more pragmatic, much more calibrated in how he approaches his presidency. So in short, there's nothing predetermined about what a Marcos Jr. presidency could look like. It will really depend on the three factors I explained. First of all, the margin of victory and the impact it will have on the sense of self and sense of mission of Marcos Jr. Second, internal factional politics, especially when it comes to potentially Vice President Sara Duterte. And third, external pressure. Anong gagawin ng Amerika, yung mga ibang powers, yung partners, yung China, yung Russia, etc. So these three elements are very important. Now, let me close on this note because this is very important. Nothing is predetermined with either these elections, so meaning things could still change in the coming weeks, or even if, should the current frontrunner win with his presidency. Therefore, the struggle for the future of the Philippines is far from over. Do not only look at what's gonna happen sa election na ito. Huwag nyo lang tignan kaagad yun ang mangyari the first 100 days after. Ang struggle for democracy is a continuous process. And even if Leni wins, she will have to have a strong movement behind her so that pwede niya ma-overwhelm and overcome yung mga trapo who will oppose structural reforms, progressive appointments, so on and so forth. Alright? So yon. Okay. This is how you do analysis, right? Put aside for a moment partisanship, your emotions, your feelings, your misgivings. Look at the possible scenarios based on the lay of the land at saka yung alignment of forces. O yan, pag seryoso ako, di na kayo nanonood Wow, konti lang stars Sige, next naman, scenarios under Lenny. What kind of presidency we can tignan natin. Baka biglang, talagang bias tong mga to. Nasaan na yung mga kameta? Puro mga kakamping dito Saan yung mga kameta naman dyan? Yung mga kameta, nasaan kayo dyan? Ano na? Boom! Nasaan na kayo dyan? Ayan, sabi ni Alba, purong reklamo yung opposition. Kung wala naman palpak siguro, wala rin masyadong reklamo, di ba po? Wala akong sinasabi ko lang. That's my opinion, respect my opinion. O, di ba, respect my opinion, di-respect nyo rin yung opposition na nagreklamo sa kapalpakan naman na totoo. O, di ba? Ayan na, yung mga nagbigay ng mga stars dyan. Stars dyan, ayan na, magbigay na kayo para may pang-load tayo ulit. O, medyo naghirap pa tayo, nag-exercise pa tayo para masuot natin to na medyo Grabe naman, talagang naman tayo dyan. O bukas, next time, ube naman ako. Magsuot ako ng ube, ha? Yes, Jerome. That's what we learned about Russia. They're very good in disinformation campaigns and all of that. So you don't need... You see, the old-style dictatorship is they'll control the state media and they'll shut down the big media and then asa ka na lang sa radyo at TV na galing sa gobyerno. But now, it doesn't work this way. They can infiltrate social media, right? They can pose as ordinary citizens, pero yung pala, troll farms mga yan. So, authoritarianism operates very differently in the 21st century. But, if you're against Marx, you have to know what scenarios are really looking at. And para sa akin, win or lose, mahalaga para sa opposition to be a cohesive force in the way that is much better than what we had in the first years of President Duterte. Because a president doesn't operate in a vacuum. Nagre-respond siya sa mga pressure points from outside, from inside, of his inner circle, from the society at large, from the opposition. All of these elements are important. We still have vestiges of democracy. We're not a total dictatorship. I disagree with people who say Philippines is a dictatorship. We're not. Are you kidding me? Have you been in North Korea? Have you been in some of the Middle Eastern countries? Have you been in China? Then tell me about real authoritarianism. But that doesn't mean the Philippines is a healthy democracy. No, we're not. We're in a kind of a moving towards gray zone. And potentially, if the current trends continue, we're going to be what they call hybrid regime. More like Singapore. May elections, a little bit of freedom here and there, but alam natin what's going to happen, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Well, by the way, I'm talking about Singapore politics, not Singapore economics, which is fantastic. I love Singapore in terms of their infrastructure, education, and all. I'm talking about the politics part. And you don't want a situation to have Singaporean politics without their economics. Yun ang problema. You want to have the Singaporean economics, but not necessarily their politics, to be something more like, let's say, Korea or Taiwan, right? Yep. So, salamat dyan sa mga kaibigan natin joining us from Singapore, La. How are you, La? Kamusta kayo dyan? Namiss ko kayo, Namiss ko kayo. Alam mo, sobrang namiss ko talagang ang mag-travel dito sa Asia, sa ating mga kapitbahay, sa mga ating kameta. Ayan. Salamat kay Gina sa stars niyo po. Meron na tayo pang inom ng energy drink mamaya. Pagkatapos nito, mahal pa naman ang aircon. Alam mo naman, pawisin, Baguio boy. Tapos nasa Europe lang nung isang month na medyo winter. Di pa sanay masyado. Sabi nga nila, char. Eto na naman tayo, pare. Yes. John, don't worry. Ang next pag-usapan din natin, what could the Philippines look under a Lenny presidency? Di ba? And anong kailangan gawin ni Lenny? Kasi kung ang gagawin ni Lenny, yung mga dating na naman nilalagay nila dyan, ay wala na naman tayo dyan. Ayan na naman tayo Lenny team has to really up the game, not only in campaign strategy, but if ever they become the next administration, ayus-ayusin nila. They need a much more radical, feisty, progressive, and appealing narrative and leadership and team. Right? Alam mo, marami dyan na supportive kay Lenny, but not necessarily sa quote-unquote, alam mo na, Dilawan, Liberal Party, etc. So, that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Salamat, Bing, sa inyong star and support. Very kind of you. Uy, medyo market ng stars natin dyan. Ayan, kailangan ko yata magparinig Anyamet, apay nga kasta. Dapat matik yan. Ayan tayo Dapat matik yan. Salamat sa mga kaibigan natin from Canada. Yeah. Kay Vetchay. Kamusta ba kayo dyan? Kamusta ka dyan, Nestor? Aba, medyo hindi na masyado tayo inaano Uy, sabi ng iba, pink lawan ang diktador. Ayan na naman tayo Punta kang China, tingnan. Ayan, yan. My point is, we don't necessarily need to have another dictator to have a disaster. There's a 50 shades of gray between a full-fledged dictator and a liberal democrat, and many problems in the middle will emerge, right? Ayan. Is Lenny Robredo going to support BBM? Siya na nga magiging opposition leader if in case na nga So, if it's going to be support only on issues whereby there's a shared national interest at stake, yes, siguro. Let's say, biglang matapang si Bongbong Marcos at stand up sa China. Diba? Then, yeah, I think Lenny will support that, of course. Senator Marcos has indicated that he might roll back, actually, yung mga war on drugs ni Pound Duterte, especially yung mga EJ case and all of that. That's a good thing. I think we have to support that. We have to support, if ever, the former senator becomes the next president and he does good policies, you have to support that. Yes. My friends natin from Fresno. My friends natin from California. Friends natin from Quezon City. From San Juan. Saan po mga kaibigan natin from Mindanao? Ating mga best friend dyan. Namiss ko kayo. Namiss ko ang Mindanao. I know Mindanao is one of my favorite places. At since mukhang hindi na solid South yung next president, maka yung vice president, medyo siguro kailangan natin mag-catch up dyan. Diba? At apanak siya ay North Baka mabalin nga ag-lecture series tayo dyan mga kapsat. Nasaan yung mga Ilocano? Ba't wala yung mga Ilocano dito? Anyamet! Hey! Kapsat! Wala na, galit na yung mga yun, no? Uy, wala nga ako sinasabi. Ano lang tayo dito Nag-scenario building lang tayo. Kamusta na mga kayo dyan? Diba? Yan, yung tax issue, ayan na naman tayo dyan. Ayan na naman si Cassandra. Totoong tao ba yan? Troll ba yan? Ayan na naman. Nagtitroll na naman sa atin. Ayan na naman. Ikaw lang inantay ng unity. Alam mo, sige lang, troll guys sa akin. At least hindi ako pa-relevance katulad ng iba. Grabe yung Senate, Talagang papasok si Tulfo at saka Robin Padilla. Et al, ibang klase yung magiging Senate natin. May Bato ka, may Tulfo ka, may Robin Padilla, tapos meron kang mag-ama, mag-ina. Masaya po ang ating democracy, sorry. So, respect my opinion, my opinion. Yeah, yan tayo Yan tayo awanti solid North. Pero nagadumat nga solid South. Ayan, datoy, mga Ilocano. Yan kayo. Hindi na kayo nagko-comment mga ano kayo dyan. Nag-ghosting lang yata kayo sa akin Panak dijay. Kahit ko tibatak. Napintas met. Gapsat. Ayan, mga Bulakenyo friends natin dyan, mga Katipunero. Let's go! Mga friends natin from United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Emirat. Kamusta ba kayo dyan? Wassalam to our friends in the Middle East. Wassalamu alaikum. Sabi nga ni Marlene, napudot. Pudot nga. Naghilang mati aircon. Gawit active bagyo. At least, basta, lamis si Jai. Kahit ka, ganun yung lola ko pag mag-Ilocano. Gusto ko yung ganun niya Tsaka na-miss ko yung ni Lola. Shoutout dyan kay Lola. Kausa ka dyan, Lola. Nanood ka ba sa akin? Baka nakalimutan mo na ako, Ayan, my friends out here from Toronto. Kamusang spring nyo dyan? Sobrang lamig pa rin. Yan. Ayan na. Hindi kami bayad, sabi ng mga kakamping doon sa rally ng isang araw, ha. Talagang hindi kakam-on yun, kaka-on yun. I'm sorry, hindi Alam na this, alam na this. Alright, thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Arigato. Ohayo gozaidamasu. Kay Tone joining us from Japan. Yes. Arigato. Ohayo gozaidamasu. Thank you very much for joining us. Yan. Thank you kay Don. Medyo humabol ang stars natin dyan. Sabi nila, libre daw hanggang 75 stars. Sabi nung isa. Ayun, libre. Sige, go na kayo dyan. Libre naman sa inyo eh. Ayan, mag-crowdsourcing tayo dito. Yan. Meron tayong mga friends from Switzerland. Anong canton sa Switzerland? Hindi yung Pansit Canton, hindi yung is this the Italiano? Is this the Alemania canton? Is this the French canton? Ano yan? Ayan na naman tayo kay Bane. Sige lang, mag-troll ka sa akin, pare. Ayan. Ikaw, Bane, ano ka ba? Ayan na naman tayo. Sige, mag-post ako ng mga MMA kicks natin. Tignan natin. Sige. Sorry. Yung mga training natin. Next time, mag-live tayo from the gym. Boom, boom, boom. Diba? Sorry, black belt lang naman in Taekwondo who's working on his boxing and Muay Thai sana. Yeah. Kung sana walang pandemic, Jiu-Jitsu tayo. Ayan. Watching from Iloilo City. Ay, napakagandang lugar po yan na gusto natin puntahan sana in the future. God willing. Singapore daw is a fine city. Yeah, it's okay. Medyo mahal nga lang. May disiplina sila. Alam mo bakit may disiplina sila? Kasi disiplina natin leaders nila. Tingnan mo si Lee Kuan Yew, Lee Hsien Loong, all of their leaders, edukado, matino, matalino. I am not a fan of their political system, but, at least yung merit naman ng leaders sila. Sa atin naman, gising na. Gising na. Nag-graduate na. Aming pera, hindi pa rin nag-graduate. Ito naman tayo. Ito na naman tayo. Awanan, nag-awit tayo. Awanan. Alright, maraming salamat. Thank you very much to our friends from Marikina, kay Judith. Yan, Bane, sige, mag-troll ka pa. Babalikan kita mamaya, sige. Friends natin from Oslo, Norway. Kamusta kayo dyan? Actually, yung isang cousin ko nandyan sa Oslo. Kamusta mga Viking salmon and all of that? Alright, no, I'm just kidding. Kamusta naman kayo dyan? Beautiful, great people. Kamusta mga friends natin, mga ka-QC, Novaliches. Mga friends natin from Cebu, beautiful people. Yan. Binangonan, Rizal. Yan, mga friends natin dyan. Kamusta kayo dyan? Cebu power, ha? Medyo may Cebu power din tayo dito. Don't mind the trolls daw, sabi ni Maria. Hindi, minsan gusto ko talaga i-troll yung trolls. Alam mo, masarap sila i-troll. Kasi akala nila, yung mga matitino na matatalino ay mahina. Pwede mo sila i-bully lang. Kasi ang prim and proper nila, so kung bully mo sila, they'll be caught off guard. Ano mo ba, mas balura pa ako sa inyo. Diliman boy po ako. Alam mo kami taga UP Diliman. Balura kami. Kahit naka-Italian suit and all. Nako po, subukan mo. Sige, magbalauran tayo. Trash talk tayo, sige. Alright. Grabe. Sige, Alba. Sige, troll nyo pa ako na ganyan. Shout out!